Hey everyone, my name is Balaji Palani. I am part of products team. I actually joined Influx about a couple of years ago. My focus has been completely on InfluxDB Cloud 2, bringing it to basically launch. We launched last year in September. As part of that, we worked with a number of customers in beta release for about 6 months. And then we have been successively launching in multiple regions and so on. I mean, as Chris pointed out, so far, it's all been about innovation, IOX, 2.0 open source GA, AWS was launched on Virginia. I'm here to talk about, okay, for you to come to 2.0, then you can take advantage of all those innovation that's coming in. So my talk is going to be mostly on how do you seamlessly migrate all your resources, dashboards. What are some of those pitfalls that you have to watch out for? And I think Limeride has been thrown about, but I like to think about it as a bridge. We built a bridge, and here I'm going to be talking about how you can take each and every component and be able to seamlessly migrate or watch out for certain pitfalls, watch out for certain best practices, follow them, and then get into the 2.0. And I'm going to talk about open source, enterprise, as well as cloud. So how you can take from 1.x to 2.0. The other thing I want to mention is I would spend a little bit time on why, and then the how part of it, and then what you have to watch out for. So the sequence would be for everything, open source, enterprise, and cloud. Why is it important? How it benefits you? And then what do you have to do? And then we can talk about what are the different things you have to watch out. So let's talk about open source. First thing is why upgrade to 2.0. I think this has been mentioned a lot of times. I personally like the breadth and depth of the client libraries that we've provided. So open source is not just a single binary. We are providing a whole bunch of tools in addition to that binary, so you can actually do your development really fast, right? So from that perspective, the client libraries are pretty broad. We support about 10 or 11 client libraries. They're also deep in the sense that you can do error handling, you can do retries, you can do batch writes, you can do a lot of things with them. The other thing I'm super excited about from a tools perspective is the template stacks. What is it? It's basically a way to save your state of all of your resources, your dashboards, your tasks, your configurations, save them in a Git repo, so that you can actually, with a little bit of automation, you can actually do some performance testing, or not performance testing, but CI/CD, continuous development, continuous testing, and then if you want to deploy change management, those kind of things. The other thing that's really super powerful here is Flux. There's a lot of improvements in Flux, and I think we had a great session from Anias and earlier that talked about what the query language is and how is it powerful. When I joined Influx about a couple of years ago, I used InfluxQL. It was a lot of, hey, I can't do this. I know pretty good SQL, but I actually couldn't do join or pivot or map, those kind of things. And I felt like Flux really was very powerful in that. And when I switched to Flux, there was no going back. I could do a lot of, we do a lot of internal dashboarding tools using Flux, and it's really very useful for that. I also have a lot of metadata stored elsewhere, and like a Postgres or MS SQL, I'm able to query from that and join it together with the time series data and show it in dashboards. So it's really powerful. And the extensibility of it, I can create functions and use them somewhere else. The other part of it is, as I mentioned, I think open source is more than just a database, right? So you have tasks which allow you to do periodic functions. You can run them at scheduled intervals. You can do downsampling. You can actually um, do a lot of transformation in a specific schedule. And they actually, it's a complete platform in a box. It's very ideal for customers who want to use it at edge. A couple of customers who have like marine boats and stuff like that, they actually store locally in open source, and then they do transformation there. Then they actually push it to cloud on a frequent interval. You can think about those kind of use cases when thinking about IoT edge and so on. So how do you make this transition, right? So you bought into open source 2.0. Now, how do we made it super easy. This in-place upgrade that we provide. So what does it do? So you have to download the binary, of course, and then you actually do a backup of your data so that something happens, you can recover it. And when you run the upgrade using the command, it does the following. It actually updates your configurations. It then updates some of the metadata. It actually takes all the data from your wall and all of the other places and writes it into specific 2.0 buckets. Then actually also creates the database retention policy mapping. So your database and retention policy in 1.x would be mapped to 2.0 buckets. And then as part of it, so it's required when you are actually pointing your dashboards to those, you can actually see that they actually will work. It also migrates your users and metadata, and it will build the DSI time space index. So depending on how long you're storing data, how much data you have, this actually will take some time. So you just have to be patient with it. And we have some detailed examples and the whole process listed in the docs specific link where I mentioned below. How do we go from version 1 to version 2? A few things to watch out for. In 2.0, the authentication is required. We built it so that it's pretty secure from the beginning. And so those of you who are not using any authentication or who have turned it off by default, please re-enable them. And so create a user or something like that so that you can walk through the process, because it'll require you, the first user, which is actually walking through the onboarding process for the open source, will become the admin user. And the other part of it is it'll migrate all of your users except for the admin. Because 2.0 authentication system is a little bit different, it'll allow you to reassess. So you'd have to reassess who you want to provide admins and create them manually in open source. Your existing dashboard should continue to work. So if you're using Chronograph, you can just simply point them back to localhost, and that'll continue to work because of the Compatibility Api. And because the Dbrp mapping was already created by default, it should work. Grafana dashboards also should work, again, because of the Compatibility API. I'm going to talk more about the Compatibility API in the cloud section. I'll give you some examples there. Your continuous queries are no longer supported in 2.0, so you'd have to replace them with Flux tasks. I have some examples talking about them in a later slide, and you can see how you can actually get them done. Some of these protocols, Graphite, Collecti, OpenDSP, UDP, we do not support in 2.0, so you'd have to use Telegraph. Telegraph has all of these as plugins, and you can use the output plugin to forward it to the InfluxDB. I think this was mentioned in Tim's presentation. He mentioned that, hey, we only support Mac and Linux distribution. The Docker, Windows, and ARM supports and builds are planned for later releases. Capacitive 1.x. So I'm going to talk a little bit more detail later, but simply think about subscription is not supported in 2.0. You just have to do a dual write. So if you're using capacitive 1.x, all of your metrics collection will have to be returned to InfluxDB 2 and capacitive 1.x. So you can still be able to use the 1.x subscription API and also use the 2.0. So with this, actually, your state should be completely upgraded. Like from you can go from 1.x to 2.0 and should be able to use open source 2.0. The next, I'm going to focus on a little bit of Enterprise 1.x. If in case you are using Enterprise, you want to go to Cloud 2, and if you're, I'm sorry, yeah, Enterprise 1.x, and if you're using Cloud 1.x, how can you get to 2.0? A little bit of why you want to get to 2.0, right? So this is kind of like a marketing, but I think I want to use it to explain a little bit behind the scenes. So this was purpose-built for app builders and operators. Every choice was made by design. We actually chose to build this in a multi-tenant architecture. What do I mean by multi-tenant? So when a new user signs up, actually we assign an org ID. And every subsequent API call, writes or reads or something like that, they actually have to be associated with that org ID. And you would have to have some sort of an authentication. Either you authenticate with your session token or a token that you create that has read or write access permissions. So both of them actually help you to isolate your tenant data. So we make sure that it's secure and you only have access to your data. If you're not authorized or not authenticated, or your org ID is not proper, you would not be able to access your data. And this is all across the board, meaning every service writes, reads, tasks. Every service actually looks at the org ID, and that's how they make the suppression. I mean, I don't have to say this, but we are a cloud company. This is a cloud product. It's completely fully managed and secure platform, but the way we do it is different. We have 24/7 monitoring by the teams which actually develop these services. That means if they find an issue, chances are they will roll out those fixes in very fast. So from that perspective, it's completely managed. Each service, for example, the write service is managed by the write team. Storage team manages the storage service. They are on call. They get monitoring alerts, and they address those issues. If there are security issues, they will look after them. Not only that, we actually do backups and recovery. Data durability is very, very important for us. The way we do it is multiple layers of data redundancy. For example, when you ingest data, all of the line protocol data is backed up in a secure object store, encrypted object store. So this is required because, for example, if your cluster goes down, or even if there is a user error, you can actually request, hey, I want to go back in time to this point and replay all the data. We can do that. You can also, what we also do is we have Kafka to do write ahead of writes, which keeps it for a couple of days. Even if the storage system goes down, we can actually write it back. The other place where we do backups is on the storage compaction layer. Once the storage TSI files compacted, they are also backed up to another object store, which is secure. The reason for that is, again, if you have some problem, you want to recover them, we have recoverability from the storage perspective. Also, we can replay all your data back. So its data durability is really, really important. You can think about this, hey, we are doing all of this at no cost to you, right? So, or economies of scale. So we do this across multi-tenants. So there's economics of scale that operates for you. Elastic and serverless, nearly all of these services are completely elastic and they're built in a serverless fashion. How does that help you? Is because now you can scale up and down pretty easily, right? So you don't need to think about, hey, do I need to manage servers? Do I need to say how much I need to increase, and so on and so forth. Usage-based pricing, if you don't use it, you would not pay for that. So this is what we call as pay only for what you use. So meaning if you, for some reason, you started the project, you've gone up into your bill and you want to pause it, You can just stop all your writes, stop all your reads. You would not pay, basically you not pay for them. Multi-cloud and global distribution, this is also super important for us because our vision is to make this available in a global fashion everywhere, wherever our customers are, and we want to make it how they want to use it and how they want to consume it. Let's talk about how this saves money and time, right? So I talked about multi-tenant economies of scale. And so very easy to get started. You would not have to think about what do I need to pay upfront. You can just start it and then scale up. We have many customers in the pipe today who are actually doing developmental work, and they start very, very small. They start $5, $10 a month, and which is what is expected. We expect that during these times when you're actually building something big, we actually would start small and you start building it. Once you expect you want to go into production, you scale and grow. And that's when you think about, okay, I need more and so on. And when you think about that, there's no capacity planning required. We just use more. When you use more into the API, you actually will pay for that what you use. There's zero management overhead. You don't have to test your backups. If you do delete something, you want to recover that data, contact support and they'll get you the data back. We have the ability to get that back. You can replay that data into your buckets. This frees your time and resources so you can actually focus on developing your application, which is exactly what we want. So I think this brings up the question, okay, what are the dimensions that I'd be paying for? So you'd be paying for data in. How do we measure it? So we actually, when whatever comes in, right? So you are writing line protocol through the front end, to the API. So that's the amount of data ingested is data in. There's no rate of data. It's not like you can ingest in 10 gigabytes today, tomorrow 1 gigabyte, the day after 2 megabytes. You just pay for the volume. The second is query count. All of your dashboards, all of your client libraries, all of your applications, all of your things, they actually hit the API, which runs a query, and that's your query count. Super easy to estimate because you can basically say, hey, I have 10 dashboards, which is going to run these many times a day, and you can easily arrive at an estimate of what your bill is going to be. You can also, this is also storage. So even though it's a multi-tenant, right? So we actually calculate this amount of storage used by your data, used by your indexes, and be able to give you, hey, this is how much it costs you based on that. And this data out is basically to recuperate costs that we pay Amazon or GCP or something like that. This is the amount of data transferred out. We don't do self-service VPC API, but I believe that once you pure certain things, some of these things you can actually reduce data out and so on. Talk to us if you feel you are interested in that, and we'll work with you. So I think Ryan talked about it a little bit, but I want to cover a little bit differently. So this is super important for us because we want to make sure that we support your use cases. Your application, there's no requirement that you have to run time series data on a particular cloud provider or in a particular region. Today, we support 3 cloud providers and specific regions, but our vision is to support all the super regions, North America, Europe, and APAC, and at least a couple of them. Like, for example, in the US, you will see US Virginia and US Oregon, the 2 extremes. We might put in more things, but we plan to have a roadmap of at least another 10 to 20 clusters or regions that we will launch next year, in 2021. So you would have a pretty global available region support. And you can also pay by credit card or a purchase order. Like if you want a specific deal, you're looking for an annual deal, you can pay by a credit card, pay by a purchase order. And you can also include it in your cloud provider billing. You go from Marketplace, you sign up, and it will be included in your AWS bill or GCP. Today, AWS and GCP are available, but Azure is something that we are working towards. So let's talk about how do you cross that bridge, right? So how do we get to 2.0? There's some key steps involved. First step would be your writing. You have all of your telegraphs, you have your client libraries, you have your API calls that you're building from your applications and so on. How do we make that go into 2.0? This is pretty important. First step, you would do dual write to both 1.x and 2. Typically, people think about migration as, hey, let's get the historical data first, and let's do this. But this is on the flip side. We want to think about, let's do dual write first. Make sure you have data in both places, 1.x and 2.0. Make sure you can look at those dashboards, your dashboards work, your tasks work, your queries work, and so on. And then you can bring in historical data. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on. The first step would be to add a InfluxDB V2 output plugin. And this is, again, Telegraph. We all know Telegraph, right? So it's a data collection agent for us. It has abilities to write to multiple output plugins. So you simply have to add on all of your configurations, add the V2 output V2 plugin so that it sends it to the cloud. The other thing to think about is in your client libraries, your version 2 client libraries support both 1.x and 2.0. So if you have the time, if you have the ability to replace them, maybe that's an approach you will prefer. But there is an option that you can simply point all of your 1.x client library simply to 2.0 and they will work, because this is what we call as write compatibility API. So we built this /write API, and you'd have to give specific things like username, and instead of password, you would use the token. So Cloud 2 has the ability to, you can go and you can create a token, either an all access token, which will simplify things. But if you want to narrow down your scope in which that token writes to, so you can select a particular scope of your bucket, one or more buckets, and then just have it write to that. So you create a token, use that instead of your password, and that will allow you to write into the 1.x write compatibility endpoint. There are other scenarios. For example, you can't do anything. Like I've worked with customers who have said, hey, I can't touch my client library. I'm afraid to do anything. Then there's one other option where, hey, don't do anything. You can put Telegraph as man in the middle and use Telegraph's InfluxDB listener input plugin and the output plugin to go to both the 1.x and 2.0. This way, you would have to use Telegraph, like you would have to use something in between, but you don't have to touch your other side. So it's an option for you if you want to choose, if you want to consider. Let's talk about the visualization, right? So if you're using, I don't know, Chronograph or Grafana dashboards or your own visualization, this is the way it will work. So for Chronograph, 1.x and Grafana, you would actually add a new connection. Like for Chronograph, you can simply go in and create a new connection and point to Cloud 2. And when you point to Cloud 2, there is a bit of a prerequisite that you have to do. We call it, again, Dbrp mapping. But what you're doing is simply saying that, okay, for every database retention policy that I have on my 1.x, there is a particular bucket that needs to map to. So Telegraph autogen maps to Telegraph. Telegraph 2 weeks maps to something else. So you can actually create that mapping, and we have very detailed documentation which is available. We can simply call a curl command, and that will create that for you. And you can use that to connect into, like you can use a token, you can use a username and the URL, and your databases should be connected and mapped. So when you're running your dashboards on Chronograph 1.x or Grafana, they will actually work with the compatibility API. Your InfluxQL queries will run, and those results will be displayed and visualized. But however, if you're thinking of upgrading your Grafana, you can go to Grafana 7.1. I think Ronald provided a very good demo of how you can add InfluxQL and Flux. You can create new new data sources for you to use Flux if you want, use a combination of both. So this is also an option for you. The third aspect would be, okay, how do we write, take care of all your capacitor, alerting, users, and so on. So this, again, remember, we have not done the historical data migration yet. Let's say you have capacitor, or let's say you have continuous queries running in your InfluxDB instance. So continuous queries are no longer supported in 2.0. The best way to think about them is, okay, let's take all of these continuous queries and convert them to Flux tasks. Flux is very powerful. If you see, I've given a pretty simple example here, but you will get better performance because I think one of the major complaints we have gotten against continuous queries is, hey, whenever I have a lot of these things, then it slows down my InfluxDB. Guess what? In 2.0, all of the Flux tasks actually runs in a separate service. So task itself is a separate service that does not depend on write or your query engine or whatnot. And we can independently scale that. So you get better performance, optimized performance when you're using tasks. Not only that, it's built on top of Flux, which has additional use cases that you can unlock. To start with, Flux may seem a little bit heavy, but in all of the cases where I've worked with customers where they start with one, maybe two people, two users starting Flux, and once they get started, they don't want to ever go back. And that's why I think it's important to understand that, okay, if you have continuous queries, look at Flux tasks, you can do downsampling and all of these things using Flux tasks. So in 2.0, we also, I think Tim talked a little bit about this. We built a whole section on load checks and notifications. They actually built on top of the tasks scheduler or task mechanism. In the UI, it enables a very narrow set of use cases. You can do threshold or dead man alert, pretty simple, pretty basic. You can select a particular measurement, particular tags, and filter them and say, hey, I want to set these thresholds. You can do it, but not pretty powerful. And in most cases, I think in working with customers, it's pretty clear that they're looking for, hey, how do I, for example, I have a different metric, which is the baseline. And that baseline is supposed to be used as a threshold. You can do all of that using custom Flux task. We have a very great example in that link. Those custom checks also sometimes, again, the way InfluxDB 2 checks and notifications are built, check is a separate task, so it will run separately, and notifications is a separate task, it will run separately. So sometimes, you may want to do all of it at the same time. I want to do a check, I want to notify it immediately, and then sometimes you may want to do this way, which is I want to do a check which actually creates checks, and then a notification schedule, notification rule picks up those checks and says, okay, I'm just going to send one notification for even 10 checks, or I'm going to do this check, I'm going to send it to this person, this check, I'm going to send it to this person, and so on. So it gives you a little bit of that. But if you want to do any customization, like I see a check and I want to do immediate notification, use custom Flux task, which is not completely enabled in the UI, but it's pretty simple to go to the task system. We have all the functions for load checks and everything, so you can use it. And we are building UI enhancements to make this available in the UI itself. It's just going to take a little bit of time. But the other thing is you have all of these modern notification tools, right? So of course, PagerDuty and Slack, but we added Teams, MQTT, SendGrid, Mailgun, etc. So let's go to capacitor. Capacitor 1.x has two things, right? So you either have batch scripts or the streaming scripts. So I'm going to talk about batch first, and then we'll go to the streaming one. So you can think about batch as pretty similar to CQs. In fact, people use them because they use too many CQs, and then they have capacitor, they then build the batch in capacitor. So again, the option here would be, let's try to convert all of them to flux task. There's no auto converter, but I think it'll be better if you just convert them to task. Some things to watch out for in working with customers is we have noted that sometimes they use variables in these tick scripts, right? So for example, you have a tick template, and depending on particular environment, it actually fires differently. So these variables are not supported in task, meaning you have a variable, task doesn't recognize it. Task is simply a flux query which is running at specific intervals. So in order to set a variable, what we are, like in the future, like it's coming, what we are working on is called as named function. So every task has a schedule component and then has certain things which you can call from outside. So it becomes like a named function, and all you do is pass parameters to it when creating a task, when triggering that task, and so on. This is not here today, but this will be pretty soon available. It's just something that we are working on the design right now. The other thing to note about capacitor, I think Tim might have alluded to this as well, is we are thinking about how to use capacitor with Cloud too. So there would be some sort of ability to use flux tasks to forward things to capacitor or something like that. Again, this is early in that phase. We will, people who are interested in this, talk to us. We will engage with you. Maybe you can even have like an early access program and so on. This is streaming. In 2.0, we have not enabled streaming because again, it's a pretty complex use case, and eventually we probably do that, but it's not there today. So if you're using streaming, the option for you would be to basically do dual write. So again, we talked about dual write separately. Whatever your source is, either it's Telegraph or if it's a client library, just make sure you write to 2.0 and 1.x. So your 1.x will continue to, tick scripts will continue to work, and 2.0 you can simply take the time to either see if your batch task could work for you. If not, you can continue to use capacitor 1.x streaming tick scripts. And again, we will support capacitor to work with 2.0 as well at some point. And this is early in the game, but again, like as I mentioned previously, if you want to talk to us, super interested in it, please engage us. Please talk to me. We can work on seeing what are the requirements and how we can get you connected. So that's basically how you do all of these things. And now it's about migrating your data. So we are working on some interesting things here. So first of all, if you're having less than 30 days, right? So you don't have a lot of retention. Yours is a monitoring use case. You don't care. You throw out the data anyways. The simplest thing would be to do a write to 1.x and 2 for about 30 days. And don't worry about the costs. We will work with you. Contact us, and we will enable higher rate limits for Cloud 2. You can do a write, and at the end of 30 days, your data should be as if your data should be collected in 2.0, and you can simply migrate over and shut off your 1.x and so on. But if your retention is greater than 30 days for whatever reason, right? So if you have one or more databases which has more than 30 days, we have a way to do it today. It is going to be manual. So you will use Influx Inspect to export the data, and you will work with support. We have a tool which actually can ingest it via side door, Kafka to be precise, in Cloud 2. It would happen on a schedule, like in the background, you wouldn't even notice it. We'll just, it is slow, but eventually we will just migrate all your data. This is manual today. It is something we plan to expose as a self-service option pretty soon. But it's something, if you're If you're looking to do today, work with us, contact support, contact me. We will engage with you. We'll take your data. We will run that tool, and we can get your historical data into your cloud too. Okay, that's all the parts about, okay, how do I do this? How do I do that? Migrate data and so on. Let's look at usage and pricing. Okay, of course, Cloud 2 comes with a new pricing model, right? So it's a pay-as-you-go. We also have options to go to an annual or commit. So in order to do that, we have to estimate your usage, right? So estimate your usage on a monthly basis. Then you can say, hey, your annual workload looks like this. We can work on some options for you. So one option for that would be feed in your data, right? So you did dual writes and so on. Yeah, feed in your subset of 1.x. Once you do that, we have some dashboards, we have tools to look at your actual usage. Even if it's for a week, we can use that to estimate your cloud workload. And then you will work with your sales account manager to figure out, okay, what does that look like for an annual deal? If that's an option for you, we can migrate your contract and then cut over to Cloud 2. Again, we're talking about all of these things before that you must do. And this would be a last, or kind of you're looking at the pricing, and then you look to do this. The second option is, let's say that you want to know, hey, what's my ballpark in order to even start the process? So this is, if you're using Cloud 1 or Enterprise 1, we have ways to estimate your cloud costs. If you're Cloud 1, we already have your co-monitoring data where we monitor your cluster. So we can definitely give you an estimate of what your data in, what your storage, what your query count and everything looks like. If you're using Enterprise, talk to us, engage with us. We'll give you a set of scripts, which is SQL, InfluxQL. You will run them, and then that'll basically output what your data in will be, what your query count would be, and so on. That should give you a good estimate. Again, the second option is a ballpark. It's an estimate. There's a lot more things, because first one works directly with your data. It's much more closer to what your pricing will be than the second one, obviously. But second one should give you a pretty good ballpark about, okay, this is going to cost me this much. Does it make sense? Should I start the process? And then you can talk to us and start the process. All right. So in summary, you saw that for all open source enterprise cloud, how you can take from 1.x to 2. Typically, it involves dual writing using query compatibility API with Chronograph or Grafana. You use tasks, alerts in 2. We have some options for you on the capacitor side. Then migrate your data, and then migrate your contract, and then control to Cloud 2. These are some other links. Happy to answer any questions.
Balaji, do you have the sheet with the questions?
Let me see if I can switch. All right. The first one is platform support for ARM. Is there a time scale on that yet? Yep. So I think this is a question that Tim also specifically mentioned. We do have a plan to work on this. Unfortunately, I don't have an exact timeline, but this would be next. So we launched GA today with the open source tool on macOS and Linux. Windows, ARM support, and Docker are next, which we'll work on, and then we'll provide you a timeline. We run Influx as a Fargate task currently. The short answer is yes. In your particular case, I don't know whether your single binary will be installable in that Fargate task or something. We can look at it. But yeah, the short answer is that's exactly why we made it single binary, because we saw that a lot of our customers are using open source on the edges, and they simply can't just use, they have to do too many things in order to enable that. So this gives them like a way to install it on their edges with a single binary. And if there's some local tasks that they can create, great. It also can connect into cloud, send data into cloud, and so on.
All right, we're waiting to see if there's any other questions. I suspect that we won't have a lot of questions on the topic you covered, Balaji, just because once people start to really, grok what you actually presented, start doing it, then we know the flood of questions are really going to come. And so you and I talked about potentially turning this talk into a blog so that, our community members can easily kind of, look at it from a step-by-step perspective on all the things that they have to do to be able to move from 1x to 2.0. But I think, of course, you've done it a couple times. You and I know Tim's done it a couple times just to make sure that this stuff works. And I think
just one quick thing. We've done it a couple of times. We have worked with customers who have done it as well. There were a number of customers that we worked with during the beta process that actually, I think, 1 or 2 are already on Cloud 2. This is, I completely agree that, sometimes you get into this and you run into stuff. Hey, how do I do this? And how do I do that? Yeah. In those cases, please find me, send us an email or just Slack us.
And on that note, I think want to thank everybody that participated in the alpha and the beta for 2.0, because definitely there's always these use cases, these edge cases, these even sometimes the more popular use cases that we always need your help to make sure that we can make any of these upgrades, as smooth as we can. Make sure that we're not missing anything when we release these new products. So I want to definitely give a shout out to everybody. I think I speak on behalf of the entire team at InfluxData that we super appreciate you. And so thank you so much, Balaji.